Do you think Peru is just Machu Picchu on a postcard and a few llamas in front of the mountains? Then what do you make of a wall built from stones as heavy as freight cars, fitted together so tightly that not even a knife blade can slip between them? Or a desert covered with lines stretching for miles, lines you cannot understand from the ground, only from the sky? Or a city that is 5,000 years old, where archaeologists found not a single clay pot shard and not one arrowhead. Today, we're traveling through 9 places in Peru that reveal a truth most people miss. The Incas were only the last and latest layer in a much longer chain of civilizations. And each of those civilizations faced the same impossible challenge: how to survive and build in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. And at the very end, we'll reach a city that is still about 3/4 hidden beneath the jungle. Which raises a question: how many more cities like it are still lying untouched under roots, vines, and stone? Ready? Let's begin. And if you're not already subscribed to Africa Uncovered, now is the perfect time to fix that. Because what comes next is 9 pieces of evidence that the history books on South America still have some very big blank spaces. 1. Sacsayhuamán, the wall that shouldn't exist. High above Cusco, where the thin air bites at your lungs, stands a fortress built not for beauty, but for defense. This is Sacsayhuamán, a massive stronghold whose 3 zigzagging terraces were assembled from enormous stone blocks, some weighing well over 100 tons. The stones were fitted together without mortar, without cement, and without any visible gap. Even today, people run their fingers along the seams just to make sure the joints are real, because it looks impossible. This is not some tourist myth. You can touch it yourself. When Spanish chroniclers first saw Sacsayhuamán, they wrote that it looked less like the work of human hands and more like something built by giants. For men raised on European masonry, the precision was almost unbelievable. The fortress is usually associated with the reign of Pachacuti in the 15th century. But how exactly these stones were cut, moved, and placed remains one of the great debates in Andean archaeology. The standard explanation is that masons shaped each block on site, using neighboring stones as templates until the surfaces matched perfectly. That may explain the fit, but it still doesn't fully explain how such huge stones were hauled uphill without wheels and without draft animals larger than llamas. Some researchers suggest ramps and log rollers. Others imagine hundreds of workers pulling in unison with ropes. But no single explanation has ended the debate. And then there are the stranger stones, blocks with rounded corners and faces bending across multiple planes, almost as if the rock had been softened rather than carved. No known tool from the time fully explains that kind of finish. Sacsayhuamán was not just a fortress. The Incas saw it as part of a larger sacred design. From above, Cusco itself was said to resemble a puma. Sacsayhuamán formed the animal's head and teeth, while the city spread below as the rest of the body. Even the layout of the capital was symbolic. A city planned as a sacred predator. A fortress built from stones no one can comfortably explain. And that's only the beginning. 2. Nazca Lines in the desert, water beneath it. About 400 miles to the south, stone wasn't carved at all. Instead, People removed the dark top layer of desert gravel to reveal lighter soil beneath, creating one of the most mysterious landscapes on Earth. The Nazca Lines are giant geoglyphs. Birds, monkeys, spiders, flowers, and geometric shapes, drawn directly onto the desert floor. Some stretch for miles. Some are larger than a football field. And from the ground, many of them make almost no sense. Only from the air do they come alive. These figures were created by the Nazca culture, beginning roughly around the first millennium BCE and continuing for centuries. For a long time, people loved to describe them as an astronomical calendar. But modern research has shifted that conversation. Some of the lines seem to have served as ritual pathways rather than star maps. People may have walked them in ceremonies tied to water, fertility, and survival. That matters because Nazca is one of the driest places in the world. In a land where rain is rare, water becomes sacred. And the story got even more interesting in 2024, when teams of Japanese and American researchers used AI-assisted analysis on aerial imagery and identified over 300 additional geoglyphs, nearly doubling what had been documented through much of the previous century. Every time it seems like Nazca has given up all its secrets, the desert reveals another one. But the Nazca people did not only leave marks on the surface. Beneath the dry riverbeds near the city of Nazca lies another engineering achievement: the puquios. These are underground aqueduct systems, built roughly between the 2nd and 6th centuries CE, and lined with river stones without mortar. On the surface, they appear as spiral-shaped openings descending into the earth. Their form may have helped channel airflow into the tunnels, pushing water through the system naturally. More than 1,000 years later, some of them still supply water to local fields. Think about that for a second. Above ground, giant symbols visible only from the sky. Below ground, hydraulic engineering still functioning after a millennium. Two answers from one culture to the same brutal question. How do you survive in a desert where a few minutes of rain can decide whether there is a harvest or not? 3. Caral, the silent city. Closer to the coast lies one of the strangest ancient cities in the Americas. In the Soup Valley stand the ruins of Caral, a city more than 5,000 years old. It is older than the pyramids of Giza, and far older than the first great urban centers of Mesoamerica. Caral covers about 160 acres and includes stepped pyramids, sunken circular plazas, and residential zones arranged according to a deliberate plan. But what makes Caral truly unsettling is not its age. It's what isn't there. Archaeologists found no ceramics, no weapons, no obvious signs of war. That absence is one reason the site was overlooked for so long after being noticed in the 20th century. Many specialists simply didn't believe that a society without pottery could build monumental architecture on this scale. Then, in the 1990s, excavations led by Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady used radiocarbon dating to confirm the truth. Caral really was one of the oldest cities in the Americas. Its economy appears to have relied not on gold or corn, but on cotton and dried fish. Coastal communities traded seafood inland, while the valley supplied cotton used to make fishing nets. It was a network of exchange that seems to have worked without obvious militarization. No defensive walls, no battlefield debris, no great stockpile of weapons. And yet, this was no simple village. Archaeologists found musical instruments too. Flutes made from pelican and condor bones, along with cornets decorated with engravings of monkeys, snakes, and birds. They also found a knotted cord that may represent an early form of quipu, the knot-based record system later associated with the Andes. Some historians still debate whether a society without conventional writing, pottery, or clear evidence of organized violence should be classified in the usual way as a civilization. But maybe that debate says more about our assumptions than about Caral itself. Because this city forces us to ask a difficult question. What if complexity does not always look the way we expect? 4. Paracas, the skulls no one agrees on. If Caral is silent, Paracas speaks through bone.
On the Paracas Peninsula, archaeologist Julio Tello uncovered a burial site in 1928 containing elongated skulls, unlike anything most people had ever seen. More than 300 examples, some around 3,000 years old. The most obvious explanation was intentional cranial deformation, a practice known in many ancient cultures, where the heads of infants were shaped using boards or tight wrapping during early growth. And in many cases, that likely is the answer. But some researchers argued that certain Paracas skulls seemed different even from normal deformation, appearing larger or heavier in unusual ways. That claim fueled decades of debate, speculation, and, unfortunately, plenty of sensationalism. Later DNA testing and follow-up studies produced controversial and often inconsistent interpretations. Some results were used to argue for unusual ancestry, while other scientific work found nothing outside the known range of human biology. So the real debate is not whether the skulls are physically elongated. That part is obvious. The debate is why. Was it purely cultural body modification? Was there a rare genetic component in some individuals, later emphasized by elite fashion and status? Or have some claims simply been exaggerated beyond what the evidence can support? Even now, the Paracas skulls remain one of Peru's most argued-over archaeological mysteries. And maybe that's why visitors often fall quiet when they see them. Not because they're frightening, but because they confront you with something your eyes can see long before your mind can explain it. 5. Sipán, gold beneath the clay. On Peru's northern coast, the earth hid a very different kind of secret. In the late 1980s, near the village of Sipán, looters tunneled into an adobe pyramid and began stealing gold artifacts under cover of night. In the process, they destroyed ceramic vessels and human remains before police recovered part of the loot. That emergency drew archaeologist Walter Alva to the site. He and his team rushed to excavate before looters returned. What they found stunned the archaeological world. Inside lay the intact tomb of a ruler from the Moche civilization, dating roughly between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, one of the richest unlooted burials ever found in the Americas. The Lord of Sipán was buried with gold and silver ornaments, ceremonial objects, beadwork shaped like peanuts, and the remains of accompanying individuals, warriors, women, and even a dog, apparently included as part of the burial ritual. The craftsmanship was so sophisticated that some early observers reportedly wondered whether the pieces were later fakes, until metallurgical analysis confirmed their authenticity. Between 1987 and 1990, researchers uncovered 3 elite burials at Sipán, each offering a deeper look into Moche power and ritual. But questions remain. Who were the people buried alongside the ruler? Were they sacrificial attendants? Loyal retainers? Individuals whose deaths formed part of a carefully timed funerary tradition? Even in a tomb full of gold, the hardest thing to understand is often not wealth. It's belief. 6. Chanchan, the city made of earth. Farther down the coast rises the largest adobe city ever built. Near modern Trujillo stands Chanchan, capital of the Chimu Kingdom and the greatest city on earth made entirely of sun-dried mud brick. At its peak, between the 9th and 15th centuries, it may have housed tens of thousands of people. The city covered roughly 8 square miles and was divided into 10 major walled compounds, often called citadels. Each seems to have belonged to a different ruler. After one ruler died, his compound may have become a funerary and administrative center, while the next ruler built a new one rather than moving into the old. That pattern hints at a fascinating political system, one that historians still debate. Was it stable dynastic order? Or was it a subtler form of rivalry between elite lines? Chanchan's walls are decorated with reliefs of fish, birds, nets, and waves. Images modeled directly into wet clay and then dried under the coastal sun. It is a beautiful art form, but also an extremely fragile one, because the city's greatest modern enemy is rain. For centuries, Chanchan survived precisely because the region was so dry. But El Niño events now bring heavier rains that erode those ancient walls faster than long stretches of calm weather ever did. UNESCO recognized the city as a World Heritage Site in 1986 and placed it on the endangered list that same year. That tells you everything. Chanchan was the capital of a powerful state supported by enormous labor networks, including artisans brought from conquered territories to produce textiles, metal goods, and ceramics. And all of that was managed without alphabetic writing. Instead, like other Andean societies, the Chimu likely relied on quipu and other systems of record-keeping that European observers never fully understood. A giant city of earth, a bureaucracy without books, a masterpiece that dissolves if the climate shifts too far. 7. Moray, the Inca Laboratory. If Chanchan was a city built for rule, Moray feels like something else entirely. In the sacred valley near Cusco, concentric terraces cut into the hillside form vast, bowl-shaped depressions like giant stone amphitheaters. But these were not built for spectacle. They were built for experimentation. At Moray, the temperature difference between the upper and lower terraces can be dramatic, sometimes enough to mimic conditions found across far greater distances in the Andes. Sunlight, drainage, humidity, and wind exposure vary from one level to the next. In other words, the Incas may have created a controlled agricultural testing site. By growing crops such as corn, potatoes, and quinoa at different levels, they could observe which varieties survived best under different microclimates. An extraordinary advantage in an empire that stretched from coastal desert to icy mountain passes. There is no direct Inca-written explanation of Moray's purpose, because the Incas did not leave conventional writing behind. But the structure itself, combined with environmental analysis, makes the interpretation hard to ignore. The main debate is scale. Was Moray a unique state-sponsored agricultural laboratory, or was it one of several such sites, with others still lost beneath later construction or buried elsewhere in the Sacred Valley? Whatever the answer, Moray reveals something powerful about Andean civilization. Survival here was not only about strength, it was about experimentation. 8. Cuelap and the Chachapoya, the people of the clouds. North of the core Inca lands, in the misty mountains of the Amazonas region, lived the Chachapoya, often called the people of the clouds. Their great fortress, Cuelap, stands nearly 10,000 feet above sea level and appears to predate Inca expansion by centuries. Massive walls surround hundreds of circular stone structures, many decorated with geometric patterns. But the strangest part of Chachapoya culture may not be inside the fortress at all. It is out on the cliffs. In the 1990s, researchers documented large numbers of mummies placed in inaccessible funerary niches high in the mountains. Elsewhere, At Carahia, anthropomorphic sarcophagi stand against the cliffs, tall, human-shaped burial figures made of clay, wood, and plant material, painted in ochre and facing out across the valley. They do not look like the burials of most other Andean cultures. That is what makes them so distinctive. The cold, dry microclimate of high caves preserved not only bones, but skin, hair, textiles, and other materials for centuries. At the museum in Lemebamba, hundreds of mummies have been stored and protected while awaiting fuller study. Scholars still debate whether these sarcophagus traditions were entirely local innovations, or whether they reflect contact with older cultures from elsewhere in Peru. Either way, the Chachapoya remind us that Andean history was never a single story. It was a patchwork of worlds, some of them hanging quite literally from the cliffs. 9. Choquequirao, the city still emerging from the jungle. And now we come to the final site, the one that may matter most. Deep in the upper Apurimac Canyon, more than 10,000 feet above sea level, lies Choquequirao. Few tourists reach it, because getting there usually requires a difficult multi-day trek. But those who do often describe it as the sister city of Machu Picchu. The terraces, ceremonial areas, water channels, and stone architecture are all unmistakably Inca in style. Yet, Choquequirao is far more elusive. The wider complex covers a vast area, around 1,800 hectares by some estimates, but only a fraction has been cleared. The rest remains buried beneath forest, roots, and landslides. And with each new archaeological season, more terraces, stairways, and structures come into view. In 2004 and 2005, researchers clearing one terrace sector uncovered one of the most extraordinary features in the entire Inca world. 25 figures of llamas and alpacas created in light-colored stone set into darker terrace walls. These llamas of the sun are unique. Nothing quite like them has been found at any other known Inca site. Why here? Why in such a remote and difficult location did builders suddenly break from convention and decorate a terrace wall with the very animals that clothed, fed, and carried the Andean world? No one knows for sure. Choquequirao, probably built in the 15th century, seems to have served as a ceremonial center, administrative hub, and strategic point connected to the final Inca resistance zone of Vilcabamba after the Spanish conquest. But its greatest significance may be what it implies. Because Choquequirao is not just a ruin, it is evidence that the map is still incomplete. The more archaeologists uncover, the clearer it becomes that Peru may still be hiding more ancient sites beneath jungle and mountain than anyone once believed. So what ties together a fortress of impossible stone, lines scratched into a desert, a city without pottery, disputed skulls, gold hidden in clay, the largest mud brick city on Earth, an agricultural laboratory in the mountains, mummies on cliff faces, and a city still emerging from the forest? The answer is both simple and unsettling. Peru was never just one civilization centered on Cusco. It was a chain of very different cultures, rising and falling across 5,000 years. And each one found its own way to survive in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on the planet. And even now, much of that story remains buried, under sand, under soil, under jungle, and under time itself. If this list of 9 places surprised you even half as much as it surprised us while putting this episode together, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. This is Africa Uncovered, and the map of Earth's ancient civilizations is still far from complete.